This is a Film Stories original podcast.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello everybody and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale. I'm a writer and film critic, and today I am delighted to be joined by Sunny Singh, who is a writer and academic and novelist, and she has written a book which I think is absolutely perfect. I think I'm the perfect reader of this book. It's called A Bollywood State of Mind. Thank you for joining me, Sunny.
Thank you for having me here, and it's really brilliant to be here, actually. I'm talking Bollywood and my book.
Well, the reason I say I'm the perfect reader for this is I'm sort of someone who's wanted to sort of get into Bollywood, but have a little bit like, I remember in the early 90s wanting to get into jazz and just thinking, but there's so much of it, you know, it's so big a thing. It's such an investment of time. So I needed somebody to guide me through, and this book feels like that guide.
Thank you. A little part of my brain, my writing brain, had that idea in mind when I began the book. Partly because I have grown up with Indian cinema all my life. I was born in India in a small town in North India, so that's what we watched. We had foreign productions, both from Hong Kong and the Western world, Hollywood, Britain, France, Spain, etc. But Bollywood was our major film diet. It was the staple diet. So when I first moved out, and I was a teenager, I realized that most people in the Western Hemisphere, unless they are from one of the Asian or African diasporas, don't know the cinema, have a lot of misconceptions about the cinema, and kind of, like you said, they don't know where to start. So even if you're interested in this cinema and you go on Google or you open, Guardian review pages or something, there is no way you can understand what's going on unless you really immerse yourself, you have South Asian friends, and even then it's a kind of, often you'll hit a kind of fan discourse rather than figuring out what's actually going on in the films and why it's happening the way it's happening. So very much my idea of this book was to look at the cultural roots, to look at political and historical contexts in which this cinema has been created now for, 100 plus years, 125 plus years practically, and then try and break down the structure. I think often there is an idea that if you watch cinema, especially if you've grown up in the Western Hemisphere, in Europe, North America, you're used to a particular kind of cinema. And then you have the diet from Hong Kong or China, Korea, Japan. But often this is within an understandable structure. And the aesthetics, they feel a little different, even exotic, to use that terrible word. But there is enough similarity to be able to get it. With most Indian commercial cinema, and let's be clear, what we call Bollywood is only one of them, that doesn't happen. It works from a completely different aesthetic, philosophical, structural basis in terms of how it tells the stories, what stories are told. The aesthetics are different. The entire demand is different. And I think a large part of it is because India has produced not only films for over 100 years, its primary market and the sort of idea in its head of who the viewer is always an Indian one. So there are no sort of breaks given to somebody who doesn't get it. which makes it harder, I think, for somebody who's completely from the outside, because you're really learning a new language. And once you figure out that language, I think it just opens up a whole gateway. And that's what I wanted to do with this book.
And I think that's entirely successfully done. And as that naive Western reader, someone who's open-minded, hopefully, and has seen Indian films in festivals, but as you say, the Indian film which has been sort of curated to go to Cannes is not the same Indian film as a Bollywood that might be hitting the box office, heights of the box office in India. I was guilty of a lot of the. Well, I won't use the word guilty. I was wrong about a lot of the a lot of Indian cinema. So for instance, you mentioned how Ray is often pronounced as the father of Indian cinema, and as you've just said, hang on a minute, you're missing out 60, 70 years of cinema prior to him, and you're also, and this is what I found really fascinating, you're missing out the theatre that comes before the cinema, and how just in the way that we can look at early silence and see them being informed by vaudeville or Shakespeare, we Indian cinema has its own roots in a pre-existing non-cinematic literature or proto-cinematic literature.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that is always the most exciting part for me, to think about the roots of cinema. One of my favorite, I'm not a French speaker, so I will get the pronunciation wrong. One of the starting points for Indian cinema, I always think, is actually 1896. And this is the Lumiere brothers presenting the technology of cinema in Paris. And if I wrote a novel, and my other hat is of a novelist, and I had the Lumiere brothers present cinema, the technology of cinema, in a room called the India Room, and then we took it 125 years later and said, this is what this country did with your technology, I would be told that it's a little heavy-handed.
Yeah, on the nose.
And yet that's exactly what happens. They present this technology in a place called the India Room, and within 6 months, this technology arrives in Bombay. And to use the cliche, the rest is history. Indians take on the film technology in a way that is extraordinary. They jump on it. Within months, they start making these shorts. BFI released a few years ago these early shorts on YouTube, and they're from 1897. I mean, they're not extraordinary. They're things like trains arriving and sort of boats on the river and things like that. But the hunger is already there. Now, as this is happening, there is something else going on in India. India is, of course, a colonial and colonized state. In 1860, the crown has taken direct control from East India Company, and there is an attempt to impose certain cultural ideals from part of the crown, but there's also this, for lack of a better word, a kind of flourishing from the grassroots of an urban theater. Now, the urban theater is a very interesting example, because the urban, India has and draws on 2,500 plus years of theatrical performance and traditions and lots of philosophical writing about what it means to perform and so on. But urban theater really develops in 1860s. And there's a few things that are really crucial about it. One, it's the adoption of the proscenium stage. So the Western style stage, the idea that you could pull the curtain down, all of this starts. Some of it is in English, because these are people who the British have English theater, And suddenly, English-speaking Indians, which is a small category, realize, hey, this is something that's quite interesting. So there's an amateur theater that kicks off. But very quickly they realize, actually, this is brilliant because we can use these forms and just blend it with our own stories and start moving it around. And now something really interestingly, fabulously Indian happens. At this point, as you can say, argue even now, the bulk of the audience is Hindu, middle class, or at least upper caste. Class and caste don't map onto each other directly, but that is generally the makeup of the audience. Yet the theaters are primarily financed by who we call Parsi, Zoroastrian businessmen, one of the smallest minorities, ethnic minorities in the world, religious minorities in the world. Most of the people who start acting in it are Muslim, Jews, Christians, who are in many of these urban centers, the Calcutta and Bombay. And at the same time, they start pulling in performers, technicians, ideas, from the traditional and folk theater forms. So what you get is this huge melting pot, because they're like, okay, this is what we're going to create, but it's got to play to the audience. The audience does this. How do we make this happen? This results in this kind of meshing of certain Western ideas, proscenium stage, for example, but it then proceeds to mix it up into traditional forms and ideas. One of my favorite elements of this is Shakespeare lends himself perfectly, because you can just move Shakespeare around, as India does even today, into everywhere and everything. And you can throw in songs, you can throw in dance, you can throw in the spectacle, and it works. And one of the most amazing things is that of the 21st century, the past 25 years, one of the most extraordinary trilogies by a director is a Bollywood adaptation of Macbeth, Hamlet, and Othello. And if I gave you those films, you'd just be like, this seems familiar, but what is it? Because it's been changed entirely. It's been moved to Kashmir. It's been moved to Badlands of North India. It's an extraordinary thing. But that is drawing on this tradition. So that's the roots of this cinema, this sort of mad blend, global blend of everything you can come up with. But with this cultural base that's already going, knows the stories, knows the aesthetics, the techniques, the audience knows it, so it works for everybody. And that then gets moved to cinema and this big screen roughly around, it goes through, but the first 15 years of the 20th century.
That's amazing that there's this sort of blend, and there is a type of film that you mention in the book, which is actually, that's almost like a genre, the masala film, which is a sort of exactly that, a mix of genres and a mix of spices. And I think even the most sort of generically conventional, or not conventional would be wrong, but one that resembles more closely a sort of Western film, still feels like it's got generic elements that you wouldn't find in a Western film, but it's going over the place. There's music in it, there's sound effects, and you pin this down in the book to sort of like a carefree attitude, or a willingness to draw our attention, the audience's attention, to artifice.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a really crucial point in understanding the difference, especially from the Hollywood techniques that go back to invisible camera, to sort of hiding the artifice. The idea that you should suspend disbelief, you are there, whatever is on screen. It also has its own roots in theater, that over here, where what you're watching is somehow supposed to be in that moment real. Right? There's a huge amount of film scholarship, obviously, from in the West, both on production of this and the viewership of it. Indian cinema, especially commercial cinema, takes a very different route. And those roots and that foundation goes back to a 2nd century BC text, the Natya Shastra, which, often, in shorthand, I say, if you think of Aristotle's Poetics, this is a version of that. Except Aristotle's Poetics is about 30 pages as we have it. This is thousands of couplets. This is tens of thousands of words, and it goes into every last detail on how to perform and why you should perform that way, et cetera, including things like what colors signify and how to use sound on stage. So it's a really it's somebody who's very engaged in theater in that moment and wants to write this great treatise. It's called the Natya Shastra, which is the sort of art or the book or the Shastra of theater or performance. One of the points it makes is that you do not want the audience swept away into this performance and believe it's real. Now, that is played out in different ways. The insertion of songs, the insertion of sound. I remember when Shekhar Kapoor did Elizabeth way back when, one of the critiques of it was that, the camera moves around constantly, and it was very jarring, and the sound is in your face. Constantly there are these jarring sounds, God forbid if a tray falls off the table, it's going to take 30 seconds to quiet down. Now, that actually is intentional, because it's to remind the audience that what you're watching is only an illusion. It's a performance. Do not believe this is real. Do not believe this is the story. That somehow is the truth. There's a much more complex philosophical root to it around the ideas, which are Indic ideas around the world as an illusion, and understanding that and recognizing that is the way to move beyond illusion in a spiritual sense. So there's a very serious base to it. But I think it's one of the areas that really is difficult if you don't recognize what's happening. One of my favorite films is Sholay from 1975. And very often, if you look at BFI lists, it comes up as the top Bollywood movie, voted popularly. It's still absolutely beloved. What I love about it is it's a masala movie. Masala literally means spices. So it actually is this incredibly, complicated, long film about revenge and justice and friendship and love and all of these things put together. But it's also a homage. It's a homage to Sergio Leone's sort of spaghetti westerns. And the word that is often used in India for Sholay is the curry western, because the director takes the idea of all these great Sergio Leone films, sort of for a few dollars more, et cetera, transports them into southern India, into this village, and then creates an entire sort of epic around it. Now, when you watch that film, you can kind of think that there are similarities if you even make those connections, but you're like, wait, hang on, this makes no sense, right? One, it's not happening in 18 something. This is happening in 1970s. India, contemporary, there's trains, there's all kinds of other technology, but at the same time, so there are all these mishmashes. And yet it works as a masala movie because it creates a brilliant combination of all these elements, which are traditional to the cinema and to longer performance traditions, but constantly reminds you that don't get too swept away, whether it's love or horror or sorrow, because it is quite a violent film. It's also quite a tragic film in many ways. Don't get swept away, because there's a constant, whether through camera or mise-en-scène or through editing or through sound, there's a constant reminder that you're watching something that is artificial. It's not real. And I think once you get it, you suddenly realize all these elements, weird, especially technical elements, make sense, and they have a part to play.
It's so interesting because when I was reading a part of your book, I you know how you sometimes start arguing with the book, and there was a point where I was going, oh, hang on a minute, Hollywood movies, often sort of show their artifice, and I was trying to think of an example, and I thought, oh, okay, Singing in the Rain is all about its own artifice, it's a film within a film and everything, and then I started to think, hang on, maybe that's a Bollywood movie. Maybe that's not a Hollywood movie at all, because it's kind of the exception that proves the rule. And even when you're talking, then I'm thinking of Brecht and Alienation. But Brecht and Alienation is a kind of marginal sort of, it's an undercurrent. It's an oppositional text to the mainstream, whereas what you're talking about is the mainstream.
Exactly. I think and there's a very clear, shared, deeply rooted cultural idea that underpins it. So when I love Singing in the Rain, but like all Hollywood musicals, it sets itself up. I mean, it's really a theater production that is then transformed onto screen. Unlike, let's say, something like Sholay or Mughal Azam, or even now something like Jawan or Pathan, which is just from the last couple of years, and the big blockbuster movies, or RRR. The artifice is not a one-off. It's not oppositional. It's very much embedded into the structure of not just a single movie, but all movies, and they will constantly work around it. One way to think of it is the purpose of artifice, or one of the purposes it serves, goes back to not just the Natya Shastra, but a good 1,500 years of then lots of people arguing about these ideas in different texts in Sanskrit, but also other languages in India. So there's a good sort of, Indians love to argue about ideas. That's just how we are, But one of, and ideas and aesthetic ideas and performance ideas have a long tradition, lots of texts of what makes a performance work, why does it work. One of the ways to think about this artifice and the foregrounding of the artifice is to connect it to the role of the audience. And this goes back to Laura Mulvey, right? And the idea of the movie spectator, male, white, etc. But basically somebody sitting alone in a theater, darkened room, looking at a screen with stuff happening. It's a voyeuristic enterprise at the heart. When you go to India, and this comes up constantly with people who've traveled to India, and they go, wait, you go to India and you go into a movie theater and people are on their phones and they're walking around and they're eating and they're having a conversation with their wife about, or their moms about what do they want for dinner, and there'll be people hawking food, and even if you're in a posh cinema now, they will still come and serve you dinner because you've ordered it as part of your ticket. There'll be people maybe dancing in the aisles, when they feel like it. Last time I was at a first day show, which was for Pathan. I realized it was the morning. I was the only older person there. Everybody, but kids who had all obviously skipped school and university to be there and catch this movie. And I realized there was a new version of it, of this kind of moving around constantly in the movie theater, where these kids would wait, and it was a split-second exercise where they would stand up, turn their backs to the screen, snap a selfie of them with like the star in the background, and then sit down. And it just kind of was like this mad wave that went around the theater in like specific moments. And I'm like, how are you doing this? But that weirds a lot of the Western viewer out. But it actually makes sense because in the Indic traditions, watching a performance is a community enterprise. It's only fun when you have people to share it with. That also means the artifice actually gives you a moment of going, okay, this is really getting tense. And now I'm going to be like, I don't want to do this. And then something breaks it and you laugh. But laughter happens best when somebody else is laughing with you. When there's some kind of tragedy, you know that you're not going to be left there. It's going to have a different moment. So, and you're working alongside. So the artifice actually creates also the sense that it's okay to move around, to talk, to chat. You're not required. You are not alone in this dark room. There's a lot of you sitting around, but also walking around and chatting and hanging out. And it's a social thing to do. It's a community thing to do, to go watch a movie. Or even, if you've got Netflix and you're watching it, it's a different way of watching a movie. And once you get it, frankly, it's a lot more fun.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've sort of a colleague on, I'm not sure if it was Substack or something, who recently posted a essay all about, how you need to protect the cinema experience and people need to learn the etiquette of cinema and blah, blah, blah. And I mean, there is a cultural clash in the West because yeah, there's at least, I don't know. I mean, audience behavior has changed dramatically since like the 1940s when cinema was at its height and people used to just wander into the cinema halfway through and wait until, literally, oh, this is where I came in. I can leave now. I've seen the whole film, maybe from one half to the beginning and back again, So I was really refreshed to read this, and also the idea that you didn't. I mean, does that also impact on, say, the length of Bollywood movies, which is, if you know nothing about Bollywood movies, you know that they tend to last 2.5 to 3 hours minimum?
Well, I always thought that the length of Western films, especially Hollywood films, was kind of strange. But when you go back and you look at the big blockbusters, you look at even things like Gone with the Wind, it's vast, right?
Yeah.
Ben-Hur, vast, huge. And a colleague of mine, quite a few years ago in Barcelona, actually said, we were at a conference and said to me, don't look at production and the creative side for understanding the length. Look at the way Hollywood vertical integration of the company that produces the big houses, which are also invested in movie theaters and movie chains, and who in many ways own the screens, how they created the Western length to make sure you've got more footfall. Right? Yeah. So the weirdness is actually not the fact that Indian cinema and so many other cinemas are 2.5 hour long. The weirdness is this fact that you need sort of 130 minutes or 125. Not even. It's that. No, let me get that wrong. That's me thinking in Indian films. It's what, an hour 12 minutes, hour 25. It's a very strange process. But when you look at really even for me, the Lord of the Rings trilogy is a Bollywood movie.
Yes.
I mean, look at that, right?
Yeah.
But I do think there's been a change for multiple reasons. There's a kind of attempt, I think, especially in Europe, less so in the US, but still there, especially in like New York and sort of the big cities, of trying to elevate cinema into an art. So there has been this sense that it might be too popular. It's not given the right respect. And it kind of takes us back to Satyajit Ray, right? If you make serious cinema about dramatic things, if you do Italian neorealism, if you do sort of the French, serious stuff, not the cars, babes, and, bikinis on sort of the beach somewhere in the Riviera, that is real proper cinema. And I think there has been in the West from a very long time, right from the start, this constant push and pull. And I think there is the sense that if you're going to watch proper cinema, you're somehow, you're smarter, you're more educated, you're more cultured. It's something that also applies to books, if you read certain kinds of books. And I think that really does impact this idea of theater etiquette. And then, of course, you end up in India, where if you're going to go watch a movie and it's going to be successful, it's going to reach people, it's going to be a loud place, it's going to be people shouting at screens, cheering, having fun. The movie I was at 2023, December, it was Pathan, it was Shah Rukh Khan's big comeback movie. It was mad. People, it was like going to a party at like mid-morning. I don't know, the show that we went to, was that thing 10 o'clock or 10:30? People were there. They dressed up. It was, they had the masks. They had, it was great. Many years ago, almost 25 years ago, there was a film called Lagan, and it translates roughly to Tax, which is nearly 4 hours long. And the second half of the film is basically an extended cricket match.
In real time, by the time.
Right, but also it's really clever and it was India's entry to the Oscars. I was just like, this is so going to go over everybody's head, especially the Academy. And it was brilliant because I watched it in Delhi, and we were going with some friends, and we got to the parking lot of the theater, and this is sort of the diplomatic enclave, central Delhi. It's all very posh. It was packed with flags, the Indian flags, cricket T-shirts, and then I realized drums and those vuvuzela things, right? When we walked in, now this whole thing is set in the 19th century. This is villagers squaring off against East India Company on the cricket field. You could not hear the second half. You could not hear a single dialogue, but it was the best fun to go watch a movie. It was brilliant and hilarious. And I have to say, I always go back and say, that should be a movie experience where you walk out and you're just going, whoa, this was so much fun.
Absolutely. I mean, in the West, you sort of have this with things like Rocky Horror Picture Show and The Room, where it becomes a ritual, it becomes an event. But those are sort of seen, excuse me, as, I don't know, it's something that, as you say, isn't taken seriously. And this is the whole culture. So has to be taken seriously at the same time as being a lot of fun. One of the things I wanted to bring up, because I think it makes up a significant portion of your book, is your own sort of autobiography and how cinema has affected you, how it affects how you have approached it sort of as a family event as well. You go with your aunts and uncles and your mum and dad, and everybody is watching it. And I was thinking back to when I first went to the cinema, and some of my earliest memories, of course, are with going to see Star Wars with my dad and my brother, or see Chariots of Fire with my mum and her friend, because she thought that's the sort of thing I should be watching, is Chariots of Fire, which I loved at the time, by the way.
A great movie. Well, technically both of them, but yeah.
Yeah. So I want to, and of course within that personal context is the story of the history of recent events in India and changes. So could you talk a little bit about that, your own experiences, and also the changes and in some cases the crises and emergencies that you lived through?
I'm going to confess something. I hated writing the section which was about my family or myself, because I really didn't want to go down that route. I find it frankly boring, to talk about what happened to me. But there is an idea, because I study cinema. I sit within the cultural studies context as an academic, and I do a lot of media studies and media work. And one of the things I've always been fascinated by is how stories shape us. So we learn how to think and relate to the world through stories. You mentioned Star Wars. I think I watched Star Wars around about the same time, sort of late 70s, early 80s. Do you know Star Wars in the main one, the Star Wars? Um, the aliens speak Kikuyu.
No, I didn't know that.
There you go. And it was just thrown in as, it's fine. And my dad worked for the government, and we watched it outside India. And my Kikuyu speaking friends were in fits. They were in giggles. And being a child watching this is weird enough.
So wait a second, let me be clear. In the English language version,
when Luke Skywalker gets to the bar, when he's just gotten away from the farm, that's the first meeting, if I remember correctly, with Han Solo.
Yes.
And he walks in, and he's kind of the country boy, all going, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and there are all these weird non-human looking aliens who are chatting away and saying things, and then they kind of challenge him. That's where it is interesting that real spoken living languages across the world, and in this case specifically, Kikuyu was thrown in.
Wow. I mean,
and of course, so for me, it's interesting to think about how our experience of watching the same exact film was very weird, because suddenly that moment very early in the film takes you out of this world being created, going, right, so we're the bad, crazy, awful looking aliens. Got it. And that's a very small moment, but it's a moment that I think for me I've gone back to constantly, where how does cinema frame the world? And cinema is, for the last century, has been the biggest form of reaching out and telling stories. And it's related to a very different film, and that's a Bollywood film, Krish, which came out early 2000s, which is a kind of a remake of E.T. But one of the people involved, Shamak Davar, who's a choreographer and had done the dance, actually said something in an interview which stayed with me. And he said, I watch all these Hollywood movies, and the aliens come down, and they're always scary, and they always want to kill us and take over the world. Why don't the aliens just come down and just kind of go, hey, we want to be friends and hang out with you guys? And I think that says very clear things about how we approach the world. If you have been told constantly, aliens are scary. Aliens are weird. You're the nice country boy who wanders through the world, leaves the farm, goes out. They're going to be scary people in a bar. They're gonna do harm to you. Then it stays in your head whether you think about it consciously or not. Another trick that Hollywood uses a lot is the yellow filter. I have never been, Cairo, Delhi, Nairobi, Kinshasa, Amman, you take Tehran. These are not places that are dusty and yellow, right? Yeah. Mexico City. Yet, if you watch them through Hollywood, they're dingy, dirty yellow sky. Whereas when you walk out of the plane, even if before you arrive, you lift up your window, it's bright sunshine. Colors are almost painfully bright and brilliant. But we're taught that unconsciously. So for me, in the book, I wanted to go back and think about what happens to someone like me, who is exposed to lots of world cinema, but really grows up with this particular cinema. And I grew up with Bollywood, if you want to call it this way. in the 70s, which was kind of the first generation, I was part of, not the Midnight generation, but the generations after. The Midnight generation had just come of age, 47 to 71. They were just coming into, there were no jobs. So there's a lot of unrest, but there is also this idea of what do you do with a country that is so diverse linguistically, ethnically, religiously? How do you build a state out of that? So the idea was that you got along, you had to build bridges. It meant that the aliens weren't necessarily bad. They were just people who kind of crossed your paths and you could have a chat and get along with them. And I think, so I wanted to explore with the, if you want to call it the memoir stream, how films impact us, stories impact us, how they are fruits of a political, social context, but also impact that context. So this kind of a circular loop, which reinforces itself. And given the fact we live in a world that seems to really like films and narratives of fear and hate, and sort of seems to be acting it out. I wanted to explore that if there was another possibility, that if stories of amity or friendship, of community building, which we see as a long tradition within Indian theater and then cinema from, the first Indian feature film is 1912. So in that 110 plus years, is there a different way to be? Not just individually, but as communities, as countries, as entire sort of wider collectives. So I think that for me was the crucial part, and which is why I kept, I looked at various events, the emergency, which is in India, it's 18 months where all civil rights are suspended and kind of an autocratic moment, and the resistance that rises against it. Various other elements and how those both impact films and are impacted by films, by the movie makers. I've always been struck by the fact that Indian filmmakers from the very beginning have and we are talking early 20th century, there is a consciousness of politics. And the fact that they are automatically in a kind of anti-colonial position. The grandfather of Indian cinema, Dadasaheb Phalke, who makes the first Indian feature film in 1912. The making of that film could actually be an entire Bollywood film in itself. The history of that is very clear. He walks into the French silent film, it's 1907, 1908, The Life of Jesus Christ. And he comes out and says, we need to put our stories on screen. At this point, less than 4% of India is literate. So the easiest way to get any kind of message across is through cinema. And so the film comes out 1912, 13, and 1914, 15, the British Crown has already instituted the censor board because they're like, this could be really dangerous. And I think that's really, in many ways, supports my idea that, government, states know that these are dangerous things. And that always fascinates me. For example, we don't, Indian films have been exported because they were going back and forth. The first Persian language film is not made in Iran, it's made in India in 1931. We don't remember, but 1940s Palestine has a very vibrant film culture, and they're basically watching Egyptian and Indian movies back and forth. That also means I had this really fascinating conversation with the poet Rifat Al-Raid, who was killed a few years ago. And I said, you have to write this. And of course, that didn't happen. he talked about how Amitabh Bachchan and various other actors from the 70s and 80s Bollywood were the inspiration for him and his friends for the first Intifada. And those are the kinds of ways to think about. You had in Turkey in the 50s with Raj Kapoor, Raj Kapoor makes a film called Avara, which is a kind of Chaplin-esque figure who sort of walks, and it's a social commentary, and he dresses in a particular way. And Turkey in the 50s had the Avare, which were young men who would dress like him. And that was already seen as dangerous by the state. All these young men were doing was dressing like a movie star. And it was a point of resistance as far as they were concerned, but it was the state recognized this as dangerous. So I think, to me, my biographical strain was very much about exploring this and how we are impacted by these ideas constantly, even when we don't notice them.
Yeah, I mean, it's about there's that creating of identity via you recognize yourself on the screen, and so I remember leaving the cinema and always sort of like walking differently, because depending on who I've seen, because you physically feel like you're embodying the person that you've just watched. I would like to use the last part of our conversation to sort of do what you've kind of done for me, which is started me creating a sort of letterboxed watch list of Bollywood films that I need to see. And in preparation for this conversation last night, I watched Sholay, and loved it. I'm a huge fan of Leone anyway, and I'd caught a glimpse of Sholay because it was shown at the Bologna Cinema Ritrovato festival this year, and I was coming out of another film and sort of walked across the Piazza Maggiore, and I tell you what, the place was packed. And I mean, the Piazza Maggiore seats about 3,000 people, and you could squeeze another 3,000 people in there. And I think it was easily six to 7,000 people were watching the film and responding very loudly to it. So I want to sort of. There are several films. I think there's Sholay, and there are two other films that you really talk about towards the end of your book. I'm going to mangle the. Wait a second. I'll get the book in front of me so I don't mangle too badly. Shanti Om. Mm-hmm. Is one, and there's another which is three names, all beginning.
Amar Akbar Anthony.
There you go. Yes.
Okay. So I think I wanted to think about this idea of joy and how it's meant to be fun. Amar Akbar Anthony is a 1977 film, and what I find interesting about it is that I have probably watched that film at least 500 times. Because it is what if you are in India, or even in most parts, if you go into any of the Asian channels on TV, in India, there is at least one channel that is playing that film in its entirety at any point of day and night on every single day.
Right.
Which is pretty impressive. If you're scrolling through, if you're scanning, you will find it. Normally, now, obviously, it's one of those things where you just kind of wait for a scene and you then keep moving your channels, because I know exactly what this film is about. But it's like getting this kind of dopamine hit by just watching it for 30 seconds or 2 minutes or 5 minutes. Amar Akbar Anthony is a really fascinating film because it's made on a fairly low budget. The filmmaker, Manmohan Desai, was very clear that he wanted this kind of, he had a political idea in mind. He was actually his father, one of the team from his production crew had been actually born on Andaman because his father was jailed there. And the colonial harassment was such that they actually ended up sending the mother over to going, we cannot deal with this. So one of his tech crew was from there. The whole team was very political. And it starts off, the film starts off, it's very modern. You'll see there's just these indications, there's symbolic nods to the fact it's somewhere else. It starts off in 1947. Or it doesn't say it out loud, but it's Independence Day, so you're supposed to know this is what's happened. There are lots of the tricolor, the flags are everywhere. And this family of three brothers is split apart by a series of events. And the whole story is about how these three brothers are brought back together. A bit on the nose, but you can imagine what the metaphor is. India, Pakistan, Bangladesh.
Right.
The names of each brother, it's Amar, which is a Hindu name, Akbar, which is Muslim, and Anthony, which is Christian. And the three brothers are then basically raised in different religions, and they come together to fight the baddies and so on. There's a very clear anti-colonial subtext. There's a nation building, all of that. This film just is political, but here's the thing. It is also absolutely bonkers. It's like some of the slapstick stuff from, you're looking at Buster Keaton kind of just complete mayhem in many ways. It hurtles along like a roller coaster. There's happiness, there's sadness, it uses all the emotions, but at a speed that you're just kind of going, wait, just let me catch my breath. But it's possibly one of the best examples of masala movie. And Desai remains for a lot of us. He's, possibly one of the greatest filmmakers ever, because he does this kind of mad spectacle, but he also does really kind of politically and philosophically engaged cinema. Om Shanti Om comes out in 2008, and it's almost a sort of a generation later. It's the director and the star. Everybody is in Om Shanti Om is our age. So watch Amar Anthony, grew up on Amar Anthony, loved everything, and wanted to obviously to be Manmohan Desai or one of the stars.
Right.
And it's very clear that's what it does. What Om Shanti Om does is it picks up a 1980 film, which is about reincarnation, in itself drawn from other texts, both in Bollywood and India, but also from Western cinema, remakes it as a kind of film within a film. There's this, the first half happens in this made-up studio, and it's set in the 70s. The second half is now, but the entire film is first a homage to Desai, to Manmohan Desai, because there's this constant referencing. But what is really amazing about Om Shanti Om is every shot, every sequence, every dialogue, every song, every costume references 100 years of Indian cinema. And it's such an extraordinary, carefully done film, even though it's a madcap, completely hilarious, fun, great music, lots of dancing, brilliant movie to watch. It's the more you recognize, the more films you've seen from this tradition and from this industry, the more you realize, gosh, that's a nod to 1953, that's a nod to 1946, that's a nod to 1962, and particular films and stars. But it also brings in all the gossip industry and the fandom of these films. And it's a really, if there is one film I would say, which is truly a love letter to cinema, not only Indian cinema or even Bollywood, a love letter to cinema as it can be, it would be Om Shanti Om. So if you are just starting out, that's probably a great place to start. Sholay, obviously, I think it's one of the greatest films ever made. Amar Anthony, I would say get involved in there. Go in there, go get a drink or two. Don't sit and watch it. Just walk around and have fun with it. And if you need to, and just be aware, you might feel emotionally you've had like a gym workout and mentally because it is so much of a roller coaster ride for 3+ hours that it can be a little exhausting, but it is great fun.
Excellent, excellent. And one other question I wanted to ask before we wrap is you mentioned the recent attacks on Bollywood by the far right party in India and the government of Modi. How I wanted to know sort of how's that going? How's the situation? Is there a threat to the status of Bollywood as this great cultural power?
I think there are many. I think there's a real dampening of what can be done and what can be said and who can say it across India and I think across the world, actually. I think there's a real sense of, if you say things that may challenge power, you may be in trouble in different ways. I think Bollywood is no different. The Bombay cinema is no different from that. It has been I think there's always been an attempt from the Indian state to use this industry in different ways. I mean, back in the 50s, Nehru used to, have these big sort of delegations going to the Soviet Union with, where Raj Kapoor and Nargis were very, very popular. There is also a shift in how people watch cinema. So a lot of it is done at home, a lot of it is done on devices, a lot of it is, now one of the things we had starting 90s was the arrival of the multiplexes, which by default fragments the market, but also the viewing experience. So you're not going into a theater with 400 people. You're in these tiny spaces. So I think that's made a change. One of the reasons multiplexes kind of ran amok in India so well and so without very little sort of pushback is because despite the size of Indian film production, India has fewer screens than any other country in the world, which is a kind of weird contradiction. But a lot of it is because the kind of Hollywood vertical integration that we see elsewhere did not happen.
Mm.
So unless, private owners of movie theaters can keep themselves running, which is obviously hard, they don't have enough screens. So there's lots of elements that are playing a part. One of the things I find is that there is again, after about 15, 20 years, there's a resurgence of collaboration with other industries, which we have seen for 100+ years. So Jawan, for example, with Shah Rukh Khan in 2024, the producers were from the South, from a completely different language tradition, completely different cinematic, related but different industry and cinematic tradition. And there's more of that happening, and that's a good thing.
Mm.
But I do wonder how this will survive. And I think there's the small movie industries, the sort of direct to DVD, direct to Netflix, that is flourishing, direct to Amazon. But the big masala movie blockbuster, I think that was always a risky proposition because you never know what's going to hit and what's going to work. But I think that's somehow less likely to show up every year. It doesn't mean producers aren't trying, directors and stars aren't trying, but the chances of the big blockbuster has diminished. Having said that, we're watching this, it's again in flux. It seems this industry is always in flux. I'm watching more stuff coming through. And the so-called safe bets, which were fairly conservative and sort of mythical, etc., seem to be sort of fading away a little bit. They're not getting the same traction as they were even 3, 4 years ago. Of course, COVID also matters. But even if we go back, the kind of traction they had in 2019, and there's a different kind of attempt and of big movies. So I don't know. It'll be interesting. I mean, I'm always fascinated. The hardest thing I did with this book was to figure out where to end it. And actually, I had finished it almost. I had a conclusion, and then I had to write to my agent and said, actually, I'm changing the chapter entirely, because I was in India and it felt like I was writing a kind of requiem for this industry. And it was December 2023. We were coming out of the pandemic, and then Pathan hit. I arrived, and the stuff was on, the promos were on, and it opened to madness. And I think it was just this incredible moment of going, the country is just showing up in these tiny towns, and it revived the local theaters, the big single screen theaters. For a short, it was you could say it's we don't know if will continue or it's just a blip. And I had to go back and say, no, I'm actually redoing this. This is not over yet. This movie will continue.
I think, it's like the whole industry seems to be just sort of predicated on a constant slide, and then it's saved. The French are always saying cinema is dying, and that's the proof that cinema is not dying, because the French are always wrong.
Fair enough.
In a way that I admire. I love that. I love that passion. I was in Jeddah for the Red Sea Film Festival, and there was Akshay Kumar. Did a Q&A, and he obviously had enormous reception, massive superstar. But there was a really interesting moment, because he was talking about his films, the social films that he's done, like Padman, and he was saying how important they were and how much they were close to his heart, and they might not make as much money, but that doesn't matter because... And then somebody stood up and identified himself as an Indian Muslim man, and he said, well, the recent films you've made, it's really depressed us as a community, that towards the end there are these depictions of Muslims in a very negative light. And Akshay Kumar sort of came back with like, oh man, it's only a movie, relax, what's the matter? And it's like, well, wait a minute, you can't have it both ways. You can't, like, on the one side I'm doing this really political thing with movies, and on the other side movies have no effect on the real world.
Exactly, and I think Akshay Kumar is emblematic of what's happening with a number of very big players, especially from those who kind of from the 90s and early 2000s, where they want to go back and forth and do, well, we're doing socially relevant cinema, but hey, if we're talking about sort of bigotry and prejudice and hatred, then it's just a movie. I have to say, I find even the social stuff he does, Akshay Kumar does, a little patronizing and a little, difficult. But maybe that's because I wrote a book on Amitabh Bachchan, and he's a very problematic figure, but the largest film star. I mean, he's going now on 55 years plus of being in the movie industry. Has been a superstar for most of those, at least 50, if not longer, 50 of those years. And he's one of the stars in American Anthony and Sholay, and did do cinema that is political, but isn't condescending. And both of these films have a very strong ethical, moral, political, ideological core without the ham-handedness. I think perhaps because of that, and I have to say, I confess, I wrote a book for the British Film Institute on Amitabh Bachchan and his stardom, titled with his name, and trying to understand. And a lot of it has been that he's again clicked into the zeitgeist for much of his career. He was the angry young man in the 70s, then reinvented himself as the kind of angry paterfamilias, the sort of the patriarch in the 2000s. I think one of the most interesting processes is to look at someone like Shah Rukh Khan instead of someone like Akshay Kumar, who is Muslim, who is, I think increasingly the term used for him is the last superstar in the world. Because this is a man who's just got incredible reach across the world. It's always fascinating. I mean, I'll run into people in like Petra in Jordan and in like Kenya and in Senegal, and they're like, "Oh, Shah Rukh Khan," and he can stop traffic. I mean, he stops traffic here in London, which is just insane. But I think his cinema has stayed within that more traditional, if you want to call it, or older route, the Manmohan Desai route, where Pathan and Jawan are both very political. They are complicated films. But they are also, creating a narrative which tries and address multiple very, very different constituencies without automatically reverting to kind of bigotry and hatred and violence against particular and especially minoritized communities. So I find his brand of cinema and the fact both of his films 23, and then he followed it up with Jawan in 24, and then another film, Donkey, which didn't do as well, but they were all three huge blockbuster hits. So what the audience seems to want is slightly different from the one that Akshay Kumar probably spoke about in Chadda going, it's just a movie. I think there's much more of that sense of going, come on, give us something a little bit, at least own up if that's what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point about Shah Rukh Khan, I was in Locarno last year and he received the Pardo of the career, and Peter Bradshaw, who's a friend, was the only person who was allowed to interview him, and there were masses of people. There was sort of like, he was by far the biggest name there, the person who was who people had traveled literally continents to come and see, just to see the Q&A with him, just to see him in the flesh. And it was I think that's where there is a shift there is a sort of ignorance of and I include myself in this, of just not understanding on a global level how much the poles have shifted and how important it is for Europe and for America and the so-called West to begin to realize that there's a whole other world out there, and it's got totally different opinions and totally different cultural ways of addressing the world. And our time of teaching that world or dictating to that world has passed. We need to
if it was ever there, because India, I think the Indian film industry is a good case in point, going, we'll tell our own stories.
Absolutely.
Right. And I'm always fascinated. So the ways in which there's a whole series of conversations that happen, because Indian cinema has kind of exported it, in kind of underground routes and unofficial routes for so long, especially after the 50s and the sort of, when Hollywood's like, we need to control the world and how it watches movies, it then goes kind of underground. But, if you talk to Korean filmmakers, Chinese filmmakers, Nigerian, there is a sense that, these are shared banks of knowledge, because we don't only watch Hollywood or French or Italian. We've always watched sort of this much wider range of movies across the world. And I think that shows up. I want to pick up on something where perhaps we don't have time to kind of explore this, but I'm fascinated by the move from movie star to celebrity. And this is why I said the last movie star because I watched Shah Rukh Khan, over 20 years ago, um, go from being a human being in the lift as he was coming down, and he took a deep breath, opened his eyes, and the human being was gone, and it was a movie star. And there is some kind of a magical quality that movie stars have. And sadly, I don't see that in a lot of Indian films. So I look at these actors and stars, and they're very competent, but they don't have the star factor.
Yeah.
And the same happens with Hollywood right now. There is nobody who you just can't look away from.
Timothée Chalamet is a good example of that. That he's famous, but and I can't even work out if he's a good actor. I mean, I think he is a good actor. I think he has a competency, as you say, but to compare him to, I mean, you don't even have to go back to Bogart and Sean Connery.
Gregory Peck. I mean, Tom Cruise on his good days. Tom Cruise in the 80s, Matt Dillon, right?
Yes,
I mean, these are Julia Roberts.
Mickey Rourke, Rumblefish era Mickey Rourke. I mean, I often joke that that's my Vietnam. Seeing Mickey Rourke go from being the sort of older brother you wanted to being this sort of sorry excuse for a bigot is just one of the leave aside the plastic surgery and the failed boxing.
Stallone. I've always found Stallone and interesting. I think, by the time he gets to the Rambo and the 3, 4, 5, he's kind of gone. I think he's not even engaged anymore. And it's interesting for me to compare some of those later, the franchise, to a lot of the Amitabh Bachchan movies in Bollywood in the 80s, where he's just kind of sleepwalking. It's like, you want me to do this, I'll do it, and I'll get my check and I'm out. But First Blood, you can't look away.
Absolutely. And the weird thing is, they're remaking First Blood with Tom Hardy. And you're sort of thinking, is this pattern exhaustion? Anthropologists have this idea of pattern exhaustion where ceramics cultures just run out of patterns. And you just think Tom Hardy should have his own thing. And instead, he's what? He's Mad Max, he's Rambo, he's a comic book character. And, in between, he makes, One for Me, as in, but even the One for Me sort of films have dried up a little bit,
it's again, the star factor is missing.
Yeah.
When, and it's a weird magical thing.
Yeah.
And I can't pin it down, but I know it. I think we can see it.
Do you know, I think some women have it more. I think Nicole Kidman and, say, Scarlett Johansson have had it. Yeah, okay, all right.
Yeah, I think this is a weird thing. It's sort of, for me, 2010 is the kind of exhaustion point. I mean, it's like Keanu Reeves. Now, Keanu Reeves had it, and now basically Keanu Reeves plays himself. Yeah. And it's like he's created this character, and it's no longer, it's not, you can almost see it's like the heart isn't there.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. Oh, no.
I know, it's really sad. I mean, what are we going to do without movie stars?
Yeah, come on, kids. Come on. Send in suggestions that we've missed. I mean, because nothing would delight me more than being proved wrong on this.
Exactly. I'm looking for a movie star. It doesn't matter where. Give me a movie star from any part of the world. Not a celebrity, just a movie star.
Somebody who will take me to the cinema. Someone who I will see, oh my God, have you seen they've got another film with such and such in? I'm going to go and see that straight. I don't care what it's about. I'm going to go and see it.
Yeah, exactly.
Listen, final question. Recommended film book, please.
Ooh, I thought about this one, and I'm going to recommend a slightly off-field book. It's a book came out in 2021. It's by Shreyana Bhattacharya, who's an Indian writer. And it's called Desperately Seeking Shah Rukh. India's lonely young women and the search for intimacy and independence, partly because we were talking about movies and how they impact us. And it's an absolutely fascinating book where she talks to young women across India, going, what are your dreams? Like, what do you want in life? And they all come back to they want a man like Shah Rukh Khan. So the man he's caring, he's laughs, he's gentle, but he's also kind of, strong. So this idea of masculinity that they're seeking from their intimate, partnerships is entirely hooked on to this one movie star. And it's a fascinating insight into not just movies and India and social structures, but how movies really impact us so strongly that even what we then look for in terms of love gets centered around a movie star. They'll never meet him necessarily. They see him on screen, and yet that's the ambition. It's a wonderful book.
Wow. Okay, that's going on my reading list. I'm sold. And you said earlier as well you'd written a biography, or you'd written a book about...
Yes, I wrote a book. My last book before this one, Bollywood State of Mind, was written for British Film Institute Star Series. And they have a global Star Series where we all write these explanations. It's to think about what makes a star.
Right.
And so I wrote a book on Amitabh Bachchan. The title is Amitabh Bachchan, his name. It's a wonderful series, and I would really suggest, if you like stars and think about stars and movies in general, look it up. And my book on Amitabh Bachchan basically charts his career alongside the political, social changes in India, which is really amazing because he gets in there in 1969, 68, and then basically he's still going. He still does movies. He still does huge movies, which is slightly mad. Still stops traffic, still can't walk down the streets, and does this mad thing where he has a day where in his house where he will show up to, the gates open, and he comes and kind of gives an audience to his fans, and there are these vast crowds kind of coming in. And if you're lucky enough, the gods will be like, oh, you can come in and say hello to him. It's this mad process.
It's like a king.
Pretty much. I mean, Shah Rukh Khan does this where he kind of comes out and waves to the stars, and people come to his house, and same as Bachchan, they will take pictures of themselves and selfies in front of the house. It's kind of a pilgrimage site. But Amitabh Bachchan's career, because it spans 55 years of vast changes in India, in every which way, social, political, cultural, ideological, I wanted to figure out not only what made him a star, but what keeps him a star. Because that's the longest running superstar in the world. We don't have a single career that spans now going on almost 6 decades of being this incredible being. And so that's my book. And it's very much around exploring the fact that there's a different form of being a star outside the Western Hemisphere and Hollywood. This is a completely different way of engaging with him, and and the fandom is different.
I think the only person remotely comparable would be maybe Clint Eastwood, and Clint Eastwood started late though as well. He was like in his early 30s when he got his first real Hollywood stardom. So. Wow. Well, listen, Sunny, thank you so much for not only a wonderful conversation, a wonderful book, and for prodding me in a direction I've been knowing that I wanted to go for a while, but finally prodding me in the right direction to explore this whole fascinating culture. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. And by the way, Netflix has lots of great Bollywood cinema if you want to go on there.
Right.
Lots of stuff and actually not just Bollywood, it has lots of great Indian cinema. So if you go on there, you'll find an absolute treasure trove.
Brilliant. I shall do that immediately. Take care, Sunny. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.